The Arsen Castle. Arsen Castle was just on the outskirts of the city, a lone monolith in the center of the city's mysterious lake. As they crossed the imposing bridge, there was only a trickle of those with official business coming and going. Remy realized how different it looked up close and in the light of day. She looked over at Rook, who seemed just as awestruck as she felt. "I guess I'm gonna have to get used to coming here," Rook muttered, staring off at the distant castle. Remy followed his eyes and found herself suddenly shivering. There was something about the castle, something she hadn't noticed before. Maybe it was the proportions. Most of the windows looked too large from this distance. The front doors might be massive and intimidating, but they were also directly in proportion with everything else. As they continued to cross the bridge, she refused to look over the side into the swirling water far below. Something was swimming around down there, always circling, always waiting. "You and me both." Nightingale looked uncomfortable. "You can tell it wasn't built by humans. They did their best to make it livable, but you can still tell." "It was originally a fortress, not a castle," Rook nodded. "It was in the middle of a lake. I bet tearing it apart and rebuilding it was pretty expensive," Zeke said, flicking the charred butt of a cigarette over the edge of the bridge and down into the moat. "Let me do the talking," Nightingale said, her voice flat. "What we got into is my fault. You tried to stop me, Rook, and the rest of you were against it too. My father can think whatever he damn well wants to about me, but I don't want this hurting you guys." "If you say so," Rook said. Despite his words, Remy didn't think Rook was even going to consider Nightingale's instructions. They moved quickly up to the doors, where a pair of armed soldiers waited. Servants ushered them in, muttering deferentially to Nightingale and Zeke and not asking about the others. They were quickly brought into the throne room, where a meeting was already in session. The king and queen sat on their thrones, backs straight and expressions mask-like. Balthazar looked even more tense than he'd been at the party, and Kezia had bags under her eyes. They weren't alone either. Nightingale's brother and sister were there, along with Zeke's uncle Yoon and his mother Ida. With the way he behaved last night, Remy never would have thought Yoon would be at a royal gathering. "How considerate of my little sister to grace us with her presence," Yol muttered, just loud enough for them to hear as they approached the thrones. "We've only been waiting, what, an hour?" Balthazar did not reply. Instead he rose, clearing his throat. "Welcome back, daughter," he nodded respectfully to Zeke. "I'm relieved you made it also. This information concerns your family as well as ours." The king hardly seemed to see Rook standing there, though at least there was nothing judgmental in Balthazar's expression. For Remy, there was only confusion and a little annoyance on his face. Nightingale seemed to have noticed too, because she reached back, resting one arm on Remy's shoulder. Remy could see Nightingale's body tense under her father's gaze. Balthazar looked as though he were going to say something about Remy's presence. Then he sighed and sat back down. "There is little time, rulers and guardians of Alinea. Kezia and I should already be on the road. We cannot waste time with the formalities I would prefer." Ida cleared her throat, though she didn't rise from her seat. "Your memorial hunt. I could never forget that day." Her voice was more than a little strained. Balthazar bowed his head slightly in Kezia's direction. "I will bring the most glorious trophy yet in Lo's memory, Lady Ida. You have my word." She sighed. "I'm sure he would have been flattered." "Unfortunately, this year's hunt has come at an inopportune time," Balthazar continued. He looked to Kezia, seating himself again on the throne. He sat back down and Kezia rose. The queen was every bit Balthazar's match for confidence, her voice clear and loud in the mostly empty throne room. "You are all aware of the growing tension between Alinea and our nearest neighbor, the Empire of Brahma." "Not really," Nightingale interrupted. "I know they've hated us since Alinea was founded, but I don't know why, or why it always seems to be getting worse." Kezia turned towards Nightingale, but didn't seem angry to have been interrupted. "The details would take time we don't have to explain. Suffice it to say that Brahma has always claimed Alinea as its territory, but never used it. When we declared our independence, they failed to recognize us as a state." Yol spoke up from his chair. "Brahma is larger and more powerful than Alinea. The best intelligence we have suggests their soldiers outnumber ours 10-1. They have their own version of the Demiurge, too, a cabal of sorcerers and mercenaries called the Grim Deacons. The initiation rites alone would leave you scared." "That's enough," Kezia interrupted. "The peace envoy will be arriving within the month. Yol will conduct the negotiations and attempt to alleviate tensions before they escalate things." The peace envoy will be arriving within the month. Yol will conduct the negotiations and attempt to alleviate tensions before they escalate things. Yol? Why Yol? Ida Zhang's voice was a matter of fact, her arms folded. Take this as no slight to your son, but Yol is incapable of handling such delicate matters. He's hot-headed. Yol simply nodded at the remark, unfazed by the comment. Kezia threw her a sideways look. Ida, I have no choice. I have confidence that he'll do fine. His work at delegating peace in Fair has been commendable. You mean Shayless's work in Fair, Ida said, glancing sideways towards Nightingale's sister. Shayless stood. Yol and Nally have proven themselves more than capable at diplomacy. If it wasn't for them, I might be on the gallows in Fair right now. Speaking of Nalia, where is she? Ida tapped her fingers rhythmically on the chair she sat in. My wife has left to Fair. The Wolfric family has requested her presence as a formality. We're playing along, Yol said calmly. Ida relaxed a little. Kezia, it should be you who delegates the peace envoy. You could sell a king his own castle. If you're not going to be here, that must mean you're leaving to the west. Unfortunately, yes, Kezia said with a look at Ida. Remy's friends looked as confused as she felt. Remy looked between the two noble ladies, trying to read whatever silent conversation had passed between them. We don't have high hopes for the negotiations. Brahmin knows they have us outmatched. We're afraid they may have come to offer terms we can't accept. I will not be attending the negotiations because I will be visiting some of our closest allies to secure military aid against the invasion we believe may be inevitable. Kezia will travel back to her parents' house in the far west. The Lucero family will aid us if the worst were to transpire, Balthazar said. I expect the rest of my family to be in attendance when the Romanian delegation arrives. He turned, glancing to the little cluster of chairs the Zhangs had pulled together. And as many of yours as can be available, Lady Ida. My son has Alenia's best interest at heart, but lacks the wisdom that comes of experience. Balthazar rose to his feet again, resting one hand on the hilt of the sword at his waist. Should Yol be killed, the succession will pass to Shayless, then to you, Nightingale. May there be no need. Why am I here? Nightingale asked, and Balthazar paused. We keep our business private, he said. But you've graduated. You're part of the family now, Nightingale. That means you're part of our meetings from now on, too. Did you think politics was all about running our city? Prepare yourself, daughter. We fought for our kingdom, and we'll likely be fighting to keep it. He turned, offering his hand to Kezia. She took it, rose, and glared down at them. I expect all of you to be on your best behavior while we're gone. Nightingale nodded and watched as a retinue of soldiers followed closely behind her parents as they left the room. Remy found herself out in the courtyard of the castle. Together the group watched from a balcony as King Balthazar departed in an extravagant carriage. Zeke was smoking again, though he looked a little uneasy. Sometimes I wonder if going through the advancement made all of us lose our minds. Nobody realizes because we're all just as crazy. He looked away. Lo was my dad, but if it were me, I'd still put the memorial hunt on hold if it seemed like my kingdom was going to be invaded, you know? Must be an important hunt, Rook muttered. I'm not going to assume they don't know what they're doing. I guess there is more to it. I don't care what nefarious things my dad does on his lame hunt. I don't want to think about politics or war or any of that. We need to be more positive. Nightingale waved at the retreating carriage. Zeke raised an eyebrow. More positive? Like, how if everyone dies, you become queen? What? Nightingale put a hand on her hip. No, you dolt. I mean that my dad is gone. She still looked pale, yet some of her original energy seemed to be bubbling back. We graduated yesterday. We're full citizens of Madara. There's a whole world full of adventure out there, and the only one who might stop us is riding off in that carriage. Zeke nodded. I've meant to get out into Alenia proper. What's the point of being able to leave the Institute if we spend all our time at home? My family left me with some cash as a graduation present. Mine did too. Nightingale seemed to be getting more excited by the moment. I bet if we pulled it, we could have enough for new gear for all of us. Alenia's always been a hub for adventures. I bet we'll find some great stuff. Nightingale and Zeke pulled out small pouches and began counting how much gold they had. Nightingale's excitement was infectious. Even Rook's mind started turning. She seemed rather determined to get herself into danger on a regular basis. Some new gear might be just what he needed to be a better knight. Could be fun, he agreed. And when we're done? Nightingale hardly even seemed to hear him. We'll have everything we need to finish exploring the vaults. They all stared. It took a moment to realize what she was suggesting. Are you sure that's a good idea? I mean, Zeke said through a billow of smoke. We got the whole monster mash after us last time. Hographer probably hasn't forgotten about us. Rook cleared his throat. I admit I was curious last time, but we've seen it now. It's out of our league. Psst! Nightingale waved a dismissive hand, her tail swishing about behind her. We were just unprepared the first time. Think about it. Now that we know Hographer is down there, we can be much more careful. I haven't been able to stop thinking about what was on that pedestal. Whatever it was has to be epic. I mean, some real purple color loot. I'm down. Remy's voice was so quiet it was almost a squeak. They all turned, Rook frowning. She cleared her throat, then continued. I mean, we'll have better gear. It's not like we couldn't get away from Hographer last time. Yeah! Nightingale embraced Remy, wrapping one arm around her shoulder. Rimdog gets it! Zeke extinguished his cigarette along the railing, flicking the butt over the side. It's a stupid idea, but I guess I'm down. After we spend some time in the city first. Yeah, buddy! Nightingale yelled as she slapped Zeke on the back. Then she turned to Rook. You don't have to come, she began. I know my father made you a knight, but I'm coming. Rook didn't wait for her to finish. We'll probably need Suri's help again to find our way around. And you wouldn't have her help without me there. That's more like it, Nightingale's grin returned. But first, let's go shopping.